Oliver Kane stood in the center of Crestwood's annual summer solstice fair, basking in the collective cheer that filled the space between the colorful vendor stalls and the laughter of children darting past. The fair, a tradition initiated by his ancestors 100 years ago, now served as the perfect snapshot for his life, a picturesque, idyllic scene straight out of a storybook. Beside him, his wife Grace effortlessly charmed the locals as she handed out slices of homemade apple pie from the Kane family bakery. Her natural warmth attracted people like moths to a flame, and her camaraderie with Oliver appeared unbreakable. With grace and ease, they stood as the embodiment of the American dream. Their children, Lucy and Ethan, weaved through the crowds with the boundless energy of youth. Ethan, with tousled hair and a gap-toothed grin, chased his sister in a game only they understood, their innocent joy rendering them impervious to the adult complexities that hummed beneath the day's festivities. Oliver, ever the community's pillar, made his rounds shaking hands, exchanging jokes, and sharing in the benevolent spirit of the occasion. His role as the project manager at Crestwood Tech allowed him to sponsor events like these, opportunities to give back to the town that had supported his family for generations. The Kanes always take care of their own, he declared with an easy smile as he donated generously to the local school's fundraiser booth, a statement that elicited appreciative nods from the gathered parents. It was a mantra almost as old as the town itself, one that held a deeper meaning for Oliver, who took pride in sustaining the philanthropic legacy of his surname. But behind his confident demeanor dwelled a shadow, one that belonged to the Kane legacy as much as the heralded good deeds, a shadow rooted in unspoken grief and whispered secrets. Oliver's father, Charles Kane, had built their wealth on the back of tireless ambition, his stern expectations for his son teaching Oliver the art of maintaining a perfect facade. As the fair neared its end, and the sun dipped low, bathing Crestwood in a golden hue, Oliver gathered his family for the traditional closing ceremony. They joined hands with their neighbors to form a circle around the village green, a symbol of unity and continuity within the community. It was there, encircled by the townsfolk of Crestwood, that Oliver's gaze met Grace's. They exchanged a tender, knowing look, a silent acknowledgement of the painstaking balance between public persona and private truth. Her hand in his was both an anchor and a lifeline, grounding him amid the pressures of expectation. As the band struck up the last song of the night, a cheerful melody that seemed to touch every heart, Oliver's thoughts briefly wandered to the man in the shadows he needed to be. A man tasked with upholding a facade that had crumbled for just a moment earlier in the day when his father's scowl had cast a pall over the celebration. Yet, the facade was quickly restored, the perfect veneer cemented by the applause of a community that looked to him as an exemplar of the venerable Kane heritage. The cool serenity of the Kane household in the early morning belied the chaos that was about to unfold. Grace glided through the kitchen, packing lunches and preparing breakfast as Oliver thumbed through the day's schedule on his tablet. The children, Lucy and Ethan, bleary-eyed and tousle-haired, complained playfully about school as they slumped into their chairs at the breakfast table. "I don't want oatmeal again," Ethan groaned, pushing the bowl away with a pout that only a 10-year-old could perfect. "Your mother made it with love, champ. And you need a champion's breakfast." Oliver's reassuring words were cut short by the abrupt ring of the house phone. An anachronism in the age of smartphones, its shrill tone felt foreboding. Grace glanced at the wall clock. Who would be calling at? Her question hovered incomplete as Oliver strode to the phone. A foreman at Crestwood Tech seldom received early calls, and never from unknown numbers that made one's insides feel hollow. "Oliver Kane speaking," he answered, his voice betraying nothing of the curious unease that had settled upon him. The line was quiet for a moment before a voice spoke, a voice laden with gravity, the kind that spoke of truths one wished never to hear. "This is Principal Hawkins from Crestwood Elementary. There's been an incident, a devastating one. It's best if you come quickly, Mr. Kane." The connection died as swiftly as it began, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Oliver's face blanched at the words, his thoughts spiraling towards Ethan, who sat innocently complaining about breakfast just seconds ago. The seeds of dread had been sown, but his voice remained calm as he turned to Grace. "There's been an incident at the school. We need to go now." Panic flickered across Grace's features, quickly masked by resolve as she clutched at her children. "Come on, Lucy, Ethan. Let's get you ready," she said, her voice a strained melody of both urgency and comfort. The drive to the school was a blur of piercing sirens and flashing lights that heralded the gravity of the situation long before they arrived. As they drew closer, the kaleidoscope of emergency vehicles and the throng of distraught parents painted a scene of untold horror. "What's happening, Daddy?" Lucy's voice quivered as she pressed her face to the car window. Why are there so many ambulances? Oliver's knuckles whitened on the wheel, his only visible concession to the crescendoing fear as his eyes scanned the chaos for Ethan's familiar face. Stay here with your mother, he instructed, his tone leaving no room for protest. Exiting the car, Oliver pushed through the crowd, his heart lodged firmly in his throat. Uniformed officers held back the tide of anxious parents, their faces a mosaic of concern and confusion. Then, the news that shattered all composure, the news that no parent should ever have to receive. Hundreds of children and teachers had been poisoned, the school's food supply tainted with deadly toxins. Children had fallen ill, many fatally, all in an instant that defied reason or sanity. The world ground to a halt as Principal Hawkins approached, her face etched with sorrow. Ethan, she began, tears brimming but never falling. Oliver didn't need to hear the rest. The finality of it all was etched in every furrow of her brow, every downturn of her lips. Ethan was gone, his bright boy, his champion. It was not the piercing shriek of grace that drew him back to the present, nor the shattering grief that enveloped them. Rather, it was the suffocating embrace of reality. A reality where the perfect facade of the Kane family had been irrevocably torn asunder. The days following Ethan's death were a miasma of sorrow, the Kane house transformed from a haven of familial warmth into a mausoleum of their once vibrant life. The community of Crestwood, still reeling from the magnitude of the catastrophe, cast a collective pall over the town as families mourned and sought answers. Oliver became a shell of his former self, his once lively eyes now hollow. He roamed the corridors of their Victorian home, each step a haunting echo of a past that felt severed, untouchable, as if belonging to another lifetime. It was on one such morning, as the gray mist of Crestwood coalesced into a somber day, that a sharp knock cut through the Kane household's silence. Grace, who had taken refuge in tending to her garden, for the first time in days looking more alive amidst her roses and lilies, froze at the sound. Oliver, entering the door, was met with the solemn faces of Crestwood police officers, their hats held in quiet respect against their chests, their badges glinting coldly in the soft light. "Mr. Kane, you'll need to come with us," the lead officer, a man known to Oliver as Sergeant Bill Dawes, stated with the gravitas his duty required. The sight of the officer's grave expressions forecasted a shift in the winds already heavy with loss. For what reason? Oliver's defiance sounded frail, even to his ears, against the burgeoning dread that filled the entryway of his home. Evidence has come to light in connection with the recent tragic events at Crestwood Elementary, Dawes responded. You are being taken into custody on suspicion of poisoning the school's food supply. The color drained from Grace's face as she emerged from the garden, her hands still flecked with soil, hands that had been holding up their world, now falling helplessly to her sides. Futile protests arose from Oliver's throat as the officers gently, but firmly, guided him from the threshold of his home, a home that felt as though it was crumbling brick by brick with his every step away. Lucy, peering from behind the upstairs curtain, watched in silent horror as her father was escorted into the back seat of the waiting police car. The injustice of the image, a man known for his love and charity being cast as a criminal, was too much to reconcile. The car drove away under the canopy of overcast skies, leaving a trail of whispered questions and burgeoning rumors that bloomed like noxious weeds in the garden of the town's collective mind. In the police station, Oliver was ushered into an interrogation room, a stark, fluorescent-lit contrast to the warm, dim lighting of the Kane home. Here, the questions came, a barrage intended to pierce the veil of Oliver's alleged involvement, each query drawing blood from the wound that was Ethan's death. Grace, left standing in the doorway, shouldered the crushing weight of her husband's absence, her determination steadfast amidst the threat of her family's unraveling. She steeled herself to fight, to clear her husband's name, to shield Lucy from the storm of accusation and scrutiny that they would now undoubtedly face. As Crestwood held its breath, the Kanes were left gasping for air in a world suddenly devoid of innocence. The perfect facade of their life had not only shattered but had been forcefully stripped away, leaving them exposed to the most chilling elements of human experience: treachery, blame, and the shadow of guilt. The silence of the Kane household was a stark contrast to the usual cacophony of bustling life that once filled its rooms. Grace moved about the once lively kitchen mechanically, her actions drained of purpose. The persistent ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall mocked the passage of time, meaningless in the absence of Ethan and now, Oliver. Lucy slumped at the kitchen table, her homework forgotten in front of her. Gone was her spark, her childhood joy, replaced by a void that echoed her mother's despair. When is Dad coming home? Her voice was small, almost lost amongst the sterile clinking of Grace's dishwashing. Grace turned, her fingers pausing on the rim of a mug, freshly washed but forever stained with the memory of happier mornings. She wiped her hands on her apron and knelt beside her daughter, offering a fragile smile that held more courage than conviction. "Your father is innocent, Lucy. We just have to prove it." But even as the words left her lips, Grace's own confidence wavered. She had watched the police take Oliver in handcuffs, seen the way the neighbors looked at her now with pity. Yes, but also with suspicion. Without Oliver, Grace was painfully aware of how their family seemed less in the eyes of those around them. Their family attorney, Paul Stevenson, arrived with the sunset, bringing with him the sterile scent of law offices and a barrage of paperwork. "We're going to fight this, Grace," he assured, although his usually robust tone faltered under the gravity of the charges. "I've already filed for bail, but we should prepare for the possibility that he might not get it," Grace finished for him, steeling herself against the fresh surge of worry. Lucy, sensing the tension, excused herself from the room, her silence a heavy coda to the conversation. That night, as Crestwood slept, Grace lay in the bed she shared with Oliver, a bed that now seemed foreign, and stared at the moonlit ceiling. Her mind raced with memories, desperately seeking a missed sign or a moment that would exonerate her husband. She closed her eyes only to face the haunting vision of Ethan's beaming face, frozen in the permanence of the final school photo on the nightstand. The subsequent days seemed to unfold with the same surreal quality as a lucid dream. The bail hearing was denied, the judge citing the severity of the crime and the substantial flight risk. Oliver's face, once a beacon of comfort and authority, now projected from every newsstand and television screen a silently accused man. Grace shielded Lucy from the media storm as best she could, but the truth was that there was no escaping the nightmarish reality that had entwined itself around their existence. It was in these darkest of times that Grace made a choice, a resolve formed in the crucible of her soul's anguish. She reached out to an old friend, a private detective named Tom Harrison, knowing that if there was any semblance of hope left to clear Oliver's name, it would not be found within the traditional avenues of justice. As the moon's pale light once again gave way to dawn, Grace held an old family photo, a moment captured in time, a memory that whispered of lost days. She held it to her chest as a whispered vow escaped her lips, a vow to fight for her family, to restore their fractured world, no matter the cost. The sterile lights of Lockhaven Penitentiary buzzed monotonously overhead, painting the small cell in a sickly hue. Oliver sat on the edge of his thin mattress, his gaze fixed on the cold, unyielding bars that now defined his world. The incarceration had been swift, almost brutal in its efficiency, transporting him from a life of comfort and community to the stark isolation of prison life. On the first day, he had been processed and stripped of his belongings, his identity reduced to a number etched on a plastic bracelet, and then he'd been escorted to his cell, a square tomb that stifled any remnants of hope. The rumors of his crime had circulated quickly. The guards looked at him with a mixture of disdain and pity, and the other inmates whispered "child killer" with seething contempt as he passed. Oliver tried to block it all out, tried to lose himself in memories of a life that now seemed as distant as the stars to a man confined to the depths of a mine. But the faces of Grace and Lucy served only to deepen the cut of his reality, each memory a sharp reminder of what he had lost and what he still stood to lose. The jeers and threats from his fellow inmates had been relentless, a torrent of hatred that seemed to crescendo with each passing day. But amidst the chorus of his tormentors, there was one who remained silent, a man in the neighboring cell named Marcus, stout and grizzled with years that had seemingly tempered his rage. It was on the fourth day that Marcus finally spoke to Oliver, his voice a gravelly whisper manifesting from the other side of the concrete wall that divided them. "You don't look like a killer," he muttered, almost thoughtfully, as if reconsidering a preconceived judgment. "Because I'm not one," Oliver replied, the assertion hollow against the weight of his circumstances. Marcus just grunted, the sound carrying a lifetime of skepticism born of captivity, before adding, "You better find a way to make them believe that, then." The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into a monotonous blur, with only the scheduled visits from Grace breaking the relentless march of time. She came laden with updates from Stevenson and news of Lucy, each word a precious commodity that Oliver clung to like a lifeline. Yet, with each visit, Oliver could see the toll the ordeal was taking on his wife. Her face, once so full of light, was now etched with the fatigue of carrying their family alone. She spoke of the private detective, Tom Harrison, a beacon of hope in the tireless search for evidence that might exonerate him. One afternoon, as Oliver paced the confines of his cell, the guard delivered a note, unofficial and hastily scrawled. It was from Harrison, stating that he had stumbled onto something significant, a lead that could change everything. The note was like a breath of oxygen in a suffocating room, enough to ignite the embers of hope that had dwindled in Oliver's chest. In the starkness of his cell, a renewed strength began to take hold, a resolve to not only weather his imprisonment, but to rise above the despair and fight for his redemption. Justice had never felt more abstract to Oliver than when he was ushered into the courtroom, shackled and flanked by officers. The once familiar sensation of courtroom protocol, the opening statements, the presenting of evidence, the meticulously orchestrated dance between prosecution and defense seemed alien now, obscured by the grim reality of his status as the defendant. The trial commenced briskly, the prosecution laying out a case steeped in circumstantial evidence, but presented with the kind of narrative cohesion designed to sway a jury. The state's attorney painted a picture of Oliver Kane, driven to the brink by the weight of his family legacy, outlining alleged motives ranging from financial distress to psychological fracture. As the first day progressed, Oliver's heart sank with each new exhibit and revelation. He felt like a stranger in his own life, his character dissected and distorted until the man the jury saw bore only a superficial resemblance to his true self. Grace, ever present in the gallery, maintained a stoic facade, a mirror to the man she loved and sought to support. Each piece of supposed evidence laid out by the prosecution cut into her like a sharpened blade. Paul Stevenson, sitting beside her, whispered assurances and objections, but to Grace, each word sounded as distant thunder, ominous but removed from the immediacy of her anguish. The shadows of doubt and suspicion grew heavier with the setting sun, filling Crestwood with a tension that was palpable on the streets and in the homes. Neighbors who had once joined the Kanes for block parties and holiday celebrations now whispered speculations behind closed doors, their trust wavering as the prosecution spun its narrative web. Back at Lockhaven Penitentiary, Oliver lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his cell. The chatter of his cell block neighbors had long faded into the night, leaving only his thoughts, chaotically ricocheting within the confines of the concrete walls. The trial's early days passed in a blur of testimony and counter-testimony. Character witnesses attested to Oliver's integrity, while forensic experts challenged the evidence's reliability and chain of custody. Yet with each passing hour in the courtroom, the shadow over the Kane name grew more ominous. Repeated denials of bail left Oliver to return to his cell each night, where he was haunted by the memory of Grace's strained smiles and Lucy's guarded visits. The facade of the dependable community leader and family man he once portrayed had been steadily dismantled until all that remained was the shell of a man fighting for his life against an invisible adversary, public perception. The trial concluded with the jury's cursory dismissal to deliberate, a formality in the face of the state's case. Time seemed to stall, melding moments into a monochrome malaise as Oliver awaited the verdict. When Judgment Day arrived, and the jury filed in with somber faces, Oliver could feel the final threads of his hope fraying. The foreperson stood, the words that followed resounding like a death knell, guilty.